Great. Welcome to the session, everyone, today. The session's going to be on selling your transferable skills. I'm Chloe. I'm a university recruiter here at Teach First, and the aim of my role is to support people through the application process for some of our different programs. And I think that's important for you to know because I look at people's CVs and I meet students every single day. And so I think that some of the things that I look at in somebody's application form. These are the kind of things that we're going to go through today, and you're going to be able to gain an understanding of what employers are looking for and how you can do the best you can in applications and things like that. So I wanted to start with a quick poll, really. If you've never used a poll function before, it's going to be coming up on the screen in a second. And I want you to just tick for me as many of those that apply to you as possible. I just want to know, why did you book onto this event today? So if you can click your answers on the screen, that would be good. Brilliant, thank you. Great. Still waiting for a few more. Fab. Well, thank you very much, everybody. So you can see that generally the main reason why people are here is because they want to be able to learn how to sell their skills to employers. I'll share the results for you all. And so a range of things. People want to find out about Teach First, learn how to develop their skills, find out what employers are looking for, how to pass interviews, how to pass job applications. And that's really good to hear that these are the kind of reasons why you've joined the session today, because these are the kind of things that we're going to be covering in the presentation. So that's great. So just to go over the objectives then, the aim is to be able to understand what transferable skills are and how they're different to competencies. We're going to look at identifying your experiences and opportunities for developing your experiences and also developing your own skills and competencies as well. And then finally, we're going to be able to answer, hopefully by the end of this, written competency questions in application forms. So I wanted to start with what are transferable skills? I know that the session today is going to be really interactive, so if everybody could get involved, that would be brilliant. I'm sure you all know where the chat box is, so if you could just write me one or two things in the chat box for what you think a transferable skill is and maybe why they're important. I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that now. Brilliant. Someone off the mark first. Time management. Yeah, that's an idea of a transferable skill. Yeah, because it allows you to maintain a good work-life balance. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, a transferable skill is a skill such as communication, which is valuable across sectors, and a skill which can be used in a massive range of jobs. Exactly, you're all pretty much right there and pretty much spot on. I knew that was a fairly basic question, so we're going to skip fairly quickly over transferable skill in this respect. So transferable skills come from a range of different experiences, as you've all just said. And you can gain a lot of these transferable skills from not just paid work or even volunteering work, but you can gain them as well from your home life and your personal life. Things such as hobbies, caring for family members, any personal challenges you've set for yourself, such as fundraising for charity, completing sporting events. These are the kind of things that will provide you with all of the great transferable skills you need for the world of work. And these skills aren't specific to one particular area of work, they're transferable to a range of settings and situations. But in terms of these transferable skills, what are employers actually looking for? And in order to be successful at job applications and interviews, you need to be asking yourself this question. Every employer, organisation, and company has their own skills and competencies that they require, and they require these of all members of staff. So in the session today, we're going to cover the difference between skills, like we've just talked about, and competencies, as these two things are often confused. One of the main things that I want to share with you guys today, after seeing so many different CVs, is do not send out the same CV to different organizations. As a recruiter, we can definitely tell when this has been done, and it really doesn't look professional. So the idea is you need to tailor your application to the job you're applying for specifically. And it's important when applying for a job to take into account time for reading the job description and the person spec and being able to tailor your application to those, because that is exactly what employers are actually looking for. To give you an idea about what these two things are, the job description will highlight exactly what the role will entail. So for a teacher, it would say things like preparing lesson plans, educating students, assigning homework, grading tests, and that kind of thing. Whereas the person spec will outline exactly what they're looking for in terms of skills and competencies. So that's the difference between those two things, but they're both really important whilst applying for jobs. One of the questions that someone asked me in this skills session that I ran the other day for a different set of students was, how do we know whether we're good enough to apply for a job? And I'd say looking through the job description and the person spec are two of the most important things you could do for that. Whilst looking through the job description, you need to be able to assess whether or not you can do most of the things on there. You don't need to be able to do all of the things on there because, of course, the employer will expect you to learn and grow and develop in role. So you don't need to be able to do everything on the job description, just some of the key things, and more importantly, most of the things that are on there. On the person spec, there'll be different types of criteria that they're looking for. So some will be essential and some will be like preferable. I would make sure that you're going for the ones that are essential. If you don't meet all of that essential criteria on the person spec, then you're never going to be invited to an interview. So just making sure that you're meeting all of the essential criteria on there. So moving on to the difference between competencies versus skills. Competencies are certain attributes that employers outline in everyone they work with. And these are really important because in turn, they shape the culture of an organization. So employers often assess these through competency-based questions, both at interview and written application stage. And that's something that you guys have identified as one of the things that you wanted to get out of this session. So it is really important for you to understand what a competency is and why you need to meet those. And competencies are made up of a range of different experiences and encompasses both knowledge and abilities, and that includes your transferable skills. So you'll be asked questions around your competencies, and these are called competency-based questions, and we're going to look at those in more detail later on. But looking more closely at the difference between competencies and skills, employers have been using competencies to recruit and manage employees for years and years. And they're really, really crucial as part of the application process. And sometimes entry level jobs and grad schemes don't expect you to have all of the skills required for the role yet, because we know that you'll develop those on the program, but you need to be able to demonstrate how you meet those competencies. So as an example, Teach First, as I'm sure you know, offers a graduate scheme. So when being assessed for our graduate scheme, you don't need the hard skills required to be a teacher. You don't need to know everything about behaviour management, everything about lesson planning, because you're applying for a training route aimed at developing those skills. So by looking at competencies, we look instead for somebody who will be able to be successful as a teacher once they've developed those skills. So that's something really important that you need to think about when applying for graduate jobs specifically. So I wanted to give you an example of what competencies are. So our Teach First competencies are up on the board, and I imagine whatever job you're going to apply for will have their own version of these competencies. And generally, these can be found on the website of whichever organisation you're going to apply for. So these are the competencies that we have. They're things like humility, respect, and empathy, leadership, resilience, effective interaction and good communication skills, and problem solving. And these are all of the things that we think a really good teacher will have. And we want you to be able to demonstrate them in both your written application and in the interview day as well. And all other organisations will have a similar thing too. So just really making sure that I reiterate to you guys that you really do tailor your application to the competencies of the place that you're applying for. And if you don't think that you meet all of the competencies for that job yet, that's fine. Because later on in the session, we're also going to talk about ways that you can seek out opportunities to develop these. And we're actually going to go on to talk about some of those things now. So I wanted to just put this question out there to you guys, and again, pop it in the chat box as well for me. What types of experiences can people gain to help develop their competencies whilst they're at university? So if you could pop for me in the chat box, as you know, you can even think about some of them that you have. So for example, for me, I'm the captain of my hockey club. So for me, captaining a sports team is a really good way of helping me to develop my competencies. So if you could write me some ideas in the chat box of how you think other people can develop theirs. Yep, volunteering, work experience, insight stays. Yep, great. Any more? Yeah, Marianne's given a really good example. So work experience, for example, British Council programme, teaching English abroad. Yeah. Volunteering, specifically volunteering whilst working with different communities. That's good. Becoming society committee members, another really good one. Yeah. Great. So it sounds like you guys have got a bit of a handle on how you can go about developing your skills, which is great. But I guess the question now is how many of you actually do those things? And the flip side of that is how many of you know how to sell the skills that you've gained from these things, even if they feel like they're not relevant to the career that you're going for? Because that is the key question, isn't it? So, obviously, out of those things that we've talked about, things like societies and sports, sometimes people come to us during the application process and say, well, I'm not going to include that on my application form because it's not relevant. And, oh, I only worked in Tesco for a couple of months over the summer. And people think that experiences are too small to be relevant. And we get students feeling like their examples aren't good enough because they're not directly linked to the job. So people will say, oh, it was just a job in a supermarket. When really there are endless skills and experiences that are gained through working in a shop. There's no just about it. There's no, oh, I just did volunteering. I just worked in a supermarket. I just played football for university sport. There are loads of really important skills that you can gain from that. So, as an example, I really wanted to work in psychology, and therefore I got as much experience dealing with a broad range of people as possible. So, actually, when I did work in Tesco, that gave me the experience of dealing with things like challenging customers, challenging situations, and although I wasn't giving mental health support in that role to anyone, which would have been directly linked to the job I wanted, the skills that I did gain, like dealing with challenging customers, were transferable to other settings. And that's why it's important to be able to talk about a range of different examples when you're in an interview or when you're doing a written application. So, some of the examples that we've talked about. Are volunteering, sport, societies, paid work experience. But there's other things on here as well that people didn't mention earlier. Things like the National Citizen Service that I know some of you will have done in year 10 or 11 at school. Duke of Edinburgh Award, bronze, silver, gold, all of those matter. Being involved in or being a leader of scouts, guides, cadets, and those kind of things are really important. University projects and being part of those, they're really important as well. And any particular roles of responsibility that you've had, even in your personal life. So, say your elderly neighbour has been really struggling during COVID times to get to the shops. If you every single Wednesday have gone to the shop for them, to do their shopping, and you've been, you needed good time management for that, you needed good organization skills. It really shows your commitment to something. It shows through volunteering that are passionate about developing your skills and helping others. So even though it feels like supporting your neighbor with their shopping isn't really relevant to the job that you want in accounting, for example, it is relevant because it helps you to develop these transferable skills that are really important. And now you might be thinking, okay, that's all well and good that they're important and that they're transferable. But how can I evidence this? How can I talk about these in interviews and things like that? So, taking the example of a part time job, a part time job can show leadership and it can also show effective interaction. And here's how it works. So, with leadership, you may have led on a customer complaint. You may have supported a new starter enroll. You may have made sure that colleagues are included. You may have been able to seek out training for something new in role, set up a new way of working. These are all examples of how you meet that leadership competency through your part time job. And it's similar with effective interaction as well. So you may have communicated with customers, liaised with other employees, improved ways of working, or even given feedback to other employees when they haven't quite hit the mark in their role as well. These are all ways that you can demonstrate that you have gained that skill and that competency of effective interaction in your part time role. So I hope that helps you to kind of gather some ideas about how these transferable skills are gained in role. As an example, I know somebody mentioned about being part of university societies. They're really good ways of developing things like problem solving and planning and organising in these ways. So by doing things like fundraising, organising events, setting up new societies, resolving disagreements between society members, helping to boost membership, all of this is a really important skills, and they're really important ways that you can show that you meet these competencies in interviews. So, obviously, we've talked quite a lot about competencies, we've talked quite a lot about skills, but it's also really important to be able to self evaluate your experiences and to be able to identify any gaps. This gives you the advantage of being able to then fill those gaps before it comes to doing those applications. And it also enables you to then go away and gain a range of experiences to draw upon when you are preparing for interviews and applications. So self-evaluation is really, really important. And there's various ways that you can do this. And it's important to also keep these up to date. So anytime you've had any new experiences, it's really important to self-evaluate them. And in the next few slides, I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. So hopefully by now you've written yourself out a chart like the one that's on the screen. If you haven't, I'm going to give you another minute to do that now. So if you could just write yourself out that chart. If you haven't finished the chart, don't worry. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes anyway. I wanted to give you the instructions of how to complete it first. So hopefully you've got the chart that's on the screen. Now I want you to think about your dream career. What competencies do you need for that dream career? So, for example, a doctor would need patience, a lawyer would need resilience, an accountant would need integrity. These are the kind of things that will be needed if that's your dream career. So I want you in the left-hand column to, whilst thinking about your dream career, write the competencies that you'll need in that role. I've put an example of some up on the screen. If you're stuck, you can use those ones that I've written. They're just some of the competencies that you'll need at Teach First. So in the left-hand side, I want you to now write down the competencies that you'll need for a career that you're hoping to go into. And I'll give you a minute or two to do that now. I imagine people are working through that now. I'm going to tell you how to do the next bit as well, and then I'm going to give you a solid 5 minutes to work on this. So on the left-hand side, once you've got written down the competencies, in the middle column, I want you to then give yourself a self-rating on those competencies. So from 1 to 10. 10 being that you're absolutely proficient in that competency and you couldn't develop any more at all, even if you tried. And 1 is being that you have pretty much no experience or transferable skills to be able to support with that competency. Then, once you've rated yourself, you've given yourself a number, in the evidence column, I want you to then write out ways that you could actively demonstrate how you meet that competency. So I'll put up an example on the board for you. So here's how I might rate mine. And for humility, respect, and empathy, I might give myself an 8 because I did quite a lot of volunteering, working with different people, all with different expectations and needs. And I had to tailor my style of working to their needs. And I've written myself a little reminder example of that time that I worked with Mr. Jones, so that when I am in an interview, I know exactly which example to give when I'm talking about that competency. Just remembering as well that once you've given yourself the rating, when it then comes to the evidence, you might find that actually you don't have as much evidence as you thought for that rating. And in which case, you then need to think about, how would I justify rating myself that high? So, you need to make sure that the evidence you've got matches the rating. So if you're giving yourself an 8, I want a couple of different points of solid evidence. Whereas if you're giving yourself a 4, you might have like one smaller piece of evidence for that. So obviously you've got an example on the board of how to do that. I'm going to turn my camera off. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to get that completed. And afterwards, we're then going to come back and have a think about how you can develop those competencies that you've scored much lower on there. Great. We're going to move on to the next section now. Don't worry if you haven't finished all of that for now. There, you can go away and work on it. This is a working document. It's not something that's set in stone. That is going to be, if you've rated yourself a 6 on leadership, you're not going to be a 6 on leadership forever. And that's the importance of this, because it's something that you can keep coming back to over time and keep developing and growing, and is really important as well in your career, and any future goals that you've got. So moving on then, to have a think about how you can develop those competencies that are rated much lower. So now I want you to just go back to that chart that you just made. Which of those competencies have you rated the lowest? Or which ones do you have the least evidence for? I want you to highlight them somehow, whether that's with an actual highlighter or whether that's with an asterisk, like a star, whatever is best for you, so that it really stands out. By doing this will really help you to see where you could develop your skills and experiences, which will then help you to get that dream job that you wanted. Make sure that the chart that you've got is saved somewhere really safe, and that you know where it is. And it's also really good, as I've said, to keep coming back to that piece of self-evaluation work over time, especially when there's been a big development or a big milestone. So things like starting a new job, graduating from uni, when you get exam results, this self-evaluation tool is really, really brilliant, because loads of employers will be impressed by you doing this kind of work, because it shows that not only can you commit to your own personal development, but that you're also willing to continue learning and growing over time as well. As I've said already, there's quite a few various methods that you can use, and lots of other fancy charts. So if you fancy finding out more about it, you can just Google it. There's loads and loads of different versions of self-evaluation tools out there. But I just think this is the easiest, because it helps you to empirically measure your development and your progress over time as well. So now you've identified those areas for development, it's a really good time to start thinking about how you can seek opportunities to develop and gain more experience. And we're going to look at this in more detail on the next slide. So obviously we've already talked about some of these earlier, but just to re-highlight them again, now somewhere near your chart, maybe on the back, or scribbling around it, that's fine, is I want you to write yourself out 1, 2, 3, as many as you want, ways that you're now going to go about and try and gain more experience, or develop your skills more in that area. So, how you can go about gaining more experience, part-time jobs, taking part in societies. Something that we didn't mention earlier was being a course rep. If you're in your final year, it might be too late to do that now, but certainly if you're in one of your early years of study, getting involved with your course reps and seeing if it's something that you can do. I do quite a lot of headhunting on LinkedIn, and when I see that someone's been a course rep as part of their experience, it's something that really stands out to me. So seeing if you can get involved in something like that. Some of the others that you could do, something that you've done now, by being here, which is fab, is by doing skill sessions at university. Teach First offer loads of different ones, and the career service also offer their own, as do lots of other employers. So try and get to as many different skill sessions as you can over the next few years. And if you are unsure like what's available, you can always speak to your career service, because they're absolutely brilliant, and we'll have loads of really good hints and tips for you as well on gaining more experience. At the end as well, I'll get Amy to just pop back on from the careers service and tell you where you can find that information from, because Amy works with like finding school work experience and things like that. So I know she's got some really good projects that you can get involved in. But then, as well as doing all of that, maybe looking around and seeing if you can get involved in the Cardiff Award. I know that's something that is used quite regularly with different universities. So these are lots of ways that you can gain more experience. If you want to just jot a couple of those down as ideas, that would be great as well. And I know somebody mentioned it earlier as well, which is really good, is that you can get involved in student taster opportunities. So lots of different organisations offer these. Teach First offer two, but there's lots that you could get involved in with lots of different organisations too. So the first one that Teach First offers is our Student Taster Online, and that's for anyone that graduates in 2022 or later. And it's a 2-day online experience for undergraduates to be able to experience what it's like being a teacher and what it's like working in the classroom. And even if you don't want to go into teaching, it's a really good chance to put really good things on your CV as well and build up some of those skills and competencies that we've been talking about. The second thing that Teach First offers is for anybody in that's a penultimate year student of a STEM subject or people with STEM A levels. So if you fall into one of those categories, we offer our STEM online experience, which is a 4-day experience, which there's a couple of different ones that you can do over the summer. And that's a really good opportunity to even further develop skills in things like teaching, leadership, teamwork, decision making. And of course, you run your own mini lesson. So you get to practice those public speaking skills as well, which I know some people really struggle with. So these are really good opportunities to start boosting those competencies and those skills as well. As well, if you're really interested in taking part in the Teach First training program once you've graduated, this is a really good opportunity as well to gain an early offer for our training program. Because on the 5th day of the experience, you can take part in an assessment. And if you pass that assessment, you'll get made an offer for a place on the training program. So both of those programs are really good ways of boosting your CV and gaining new skills, but also lots of different organizations offer them. So have a look and see if, the dream job that you want has one of these as well. So the final thing then that I wanted to talk about is how to frame your competency answers, both in a written format and in a face-to-face interview. Because now you've been able to identify the skills that you need, you've been able to identify the skills you've got, but now it's how do you ace that interview? How do you ace that application form? So that's why we're going to talk about how you can sell these skills now to employers. So we think the best way to answer competency questions is by using this CAR method, which I'm going to go into detail on now. But just making sure that with competency-based questions, both at interview and written application stages, there'll be a range of different questions. So we don't want you to use all of the same examples from that one job that you had at Tesco. We want a range of examples. So that's why it's not enough just to have like a part-time job. You do need to then have other things that help your CV to stand out, like volunteering and all of the things that we've talked about. So it's really important that you firstly go away and get these experiences that you can talk about, but just making sure that you're using your very best examples from across the board. As well, when you're answering competency questions, you need to focus on one specific situation. So you will use that specific situation during the CAR method. And it's really important when using the CAR method to focus on what actions you took specifically and why that result was specifically down to you. So the CAR method then, the C stands for context, the A stands for actions, and the R stands for result. So for example, say the question is, tell me about a time when you've shown real leadership skills. When answering that question, you want to then give a little bit of the context to the situation, and 1 or 2 sentences should be fine. So you want to answer the question about leadership, talking about a time when you worked as a lifeguard at a pool. So one sentence is enough. One day, when I was working as a lifeguard, I turned up to work to realize that the manager was off sick and I had to take responsibility for the shift that day. That's it. That's enough context. We don't need to know sort of like how long you've worked there for. We don't need to know like how long it took you to get to work that morning, what you had for breakfast. Like, I know I'm joking about that, but these are the kind of things we don't need to know. And sometimes, especially when you're in a face-to-face interview, these are the kind of things that you can waffle about. But by using the CAR method, you're not waffling, you're specifically following this method and following this structure every single time. So just 1 or 2 sentences for the context should be enough. Now, the A stands for action. And when you're talking about the actions that you took, this should make up about 70% of your answer. So it really is the majority of what you're talking about. So if you're going back to that example that I talked about of being a lifeguard, we want to know the actions you took that showed that you were an effective leader in that situation. So this could be things like I made sure that all of my colleagues had arrived on time. I gave the morning briefing. I then allocated different roles to everybody, making sure that everybody knew what their role was for the day. I made sure that we had the rota up to date, and I made sure that the pool was safe, because that was my role within the rota. Okay, so that focuses around all of the actions you took. And then the R bit is the result. So, what was the result of that situation, and why was it down to you specifically? And what was your contribution to that success? So, we don't want to know, the result was that the pool managed to run safely that day. Yes, that is a good result, but why was that specifically down to you? So it's not enough to just say, the pool ran safely that day. You need to then say, the pool ran safely that day because I made sure everybody was where they needed to be, and I made sure that all of the safety measures were adhered to. Okay, so not just specifically what the exact result was, but why that result was down to you and what your contribution to that success was. So I hope that makes sense. Whenever I talk about this CAR method, some people often say, well, what about the STAR method? That's something that other people have heard about. So it's a pretty similar method. Either work well, but at Teach First, we recommend using the CAR method. Over to you now. I want you to have a look at that list of competencies that you wrote yourself down, that you needed. On the board, it says to choose a competency that you don't feel confident about, but choose any of those competencies. That's fine. And I want you to spend a couple of minutes coming up with an example of a time that you demonstrated that competency. And again, you can use the thing that's in your chart already. And I want you to then write out a bullet point response to a question around that competency. And I want you to make sure that you're using the CAR method for that. So, say the competency that you've used was resilience, and you've talked about an example when you did some volunteering. I want you to write out C, and then a couple of bullet points, A, a couple of bullet points, and R, a couple of bullet points for that. I hope that makes sense to everybody. I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that now. If anybody's got any questions about that, please pop them in the chat box or feel free to unmute yourself. Otherwise, I will leave you for a couple of minutes to get on with that. Great. In the interest of time, I'm going to stop you all there with that. But you can obviously see why that is effective to be able to go through those. And it's something that I use quite a lot when I'm preparing for an interview. I'll sit down with both the job spec and the job description, and I'll go through both of those and have a look at all of the competencies that they want me to have. And I try and preempt what the questions will be that they're going to ask based on those competencies. And then I write myself out some bullet points using the CAR method to be able to give my own real life, real world examples of how I meet all of those competencies. And once you've sort of written all of those down, you've learnt them all, they're all in your brain. They may not ask you those specific questions in the interview, but if you've used the person spec and the job description, it's likely they will ask you questions about that because that's the competencies that they want you to meet, and that's generally probably what they will be assessing for. The other thing that I wanted to just say as well is that feedback is always, always useful. So you should try and get feedback wherever possible, and it will help you to strengthen your application for next time, even if you're unsuccessful. So when you've been to a job interview, if you don't pass or if you don't get onto that grad scheme, don't worry. I always think about things as either a success or a learning opportunity. So it's not a failure, it's just an opportunity to learn and develop. And if you take these self evaluation tools that we've talked about today, that will really help you to build up your own resilience, I guess, around not passing these things. And if you're using some of the techniques that we've talked about today, it'll make sure that the next time you're in that situation, you'll be able to then pass the development center or the interview or whatever it is that you're attending. A couple of tips for me about making the most out of the application process. Um, Especially for graduate schemes or taster days or anything that you've got to apply for with a graduate employer, making sure that you're reading all of the advice that you're given. With Teach First specifically, we give loads and loads of support. There's lots of different guidance available online on our website, and you obviously have your own recruiter, which is me, and there's an amazing recruitment officer called Rosie who I work with, who gives application support, and we'll always offer you a call to support you through your application for any of our programs. And, Teach First are not the only people who do this. Lots of other organizations have a similar thing as well. So making sure that you're reading all the advice that they give you and making sure that you're speaking to the relevant people. And as I've already said, just making sure that you're asking for feedback and acting on that feedback. There's no point getting feedback and then not using these self-evaluation tools that we've talked about today, because I think somebody said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing twice and expecting different results. Okay, so to be able to pass where you previously have not passed, you need to be then doing something different. And the other thing that I could say is attending any webinars that are being offered as well. So, for example, with Teach First at the start of March, there's going to be an application and development centre workshop taking place. And this is a really good opportunity to gain hints and tips for the application process for our programmes. So, there's not a booking form for that yet, but I will email it round to everybody in this call when that is available. But similarly, if you're not interested in going into a role with Teach First, that's fine. Lots of other organisations will have their own webinars, and you can find out about these through the careers service as well. So, just to finish off, I wanted to give you my top tips for job applications and for going to development centres and interviews and things. The first thing, as I've already covered a lot today, is do not underestimate your experiences. So, if there's one thing you take away from today, it's that you remember no experience is just an experience, just working at Tesco, just working as a barista at Starbucks. These are very important opportunities for you to have developed your skills, and employers do want to hear about these. Making a record of all experiences that you've had that might be useful to draw upon. The best way to do this is obviously through keeping your CV up to date. That's one thing that I would really say. And I've learned from experience of being in the same job for 5 years, then going to apply to a new job, and I haven't updated my CV in 5 years, and I've then got to remember the volunteering that I did 2 years ago, etc. So it is really important to keep your CV up to date. And also, as we've already talked about today, analysing any gaps in your experience and researching ways to fill these. And again, just making use of all of the resources that are available to you to be able to develop these skills and competencies. And don't be afraid to ask for help. It's okay to speak to the careers service. They're really, really helpful and will be able to, direct you in the right way. Again, as we've already discussed, using the CAR method and making sure that you're using your strongest examples and preparing fully for interviews by practicing that method over and over again. It might even be worth getting like your housemate or your parents or friends, whoever that lives with you, to do a practice interview with you as well. I know it can feel a bit weird, especially if that person is like really close to you, but they're always really good ways to prepare. And then finally, you'll always be able to find the competencies that an employer is looking for, either in the job description, in the person spec, or on their website, and making sure that you're preparing a bank of answers for these using the CAR method as well. So that was everything that I wanted to go through today. I'm going to pop this screen up on the board just to say a big thank you to everyone who's attended and also everybody who's listened to this recording back as well. My email address is up on the screen. And also if you scan that QR code, it'll take you to LinkedIn, so you can add me as a connection on there. So you can always get in touch with me if you need anything. I'm going to stop the recording there. I'm going to hand over to Amy, and then I will take any questions from anybody that has them. Over to you, Amy.